And welcome back to Dark Side of the Mic. Today we're going to do a review and comparison of the Austrian Audio OD505, a handheld supercardioid active dynamic mic. So it needs 48 volts of phantom power to be enabled, and it delivers a slightly hotter output than most typical dynamics, about 47 to 48 dB of sensitivity. So even the most modest of preamps or interfaces should drive this mic without any problems whatsoever. And for those of you that don't know, Austrian Audio, while a relatively new company, they spun out of AKG in Vienna in 2017 and bring a wealth of microphone heritage and sound engineering experience to the table. And there's a fair bit of technology and innovation that's went into the OD505, and we'll talk about this as we go through, but that does mean it comes with a fairly hefty price tag of £250 here in the UK. So today we'll go through some of the features and compare it with a range of other mics with a view to characterising what makes a premium dynamic. So in terms of frequency response, the OD505 isn't something I'd normally go for, since on paper it's a very bright mic, has a 6 dB presence boost at about 4K. Now normally that's black death for my voice, and for sure there are mics that I prefer over this one, and there are other mics that do indeed suit me better. But I think the implementation here for a bright mic is really interesting. For starters, the high end feels really very soft, and the sibilance, and there is some, is nowhere near as piercing as I would expect it to be. There's also a lot of warmth here. The OD505 uses a dual capsule design, where one capsule is active and the other passive, and that's supposed to reduce handling noise and improve consistency from different positions. And in terms of a proximity effect, this is something that's really impressive about it. So at the moment I'm about 6 inches off the front of it, and there's a ton of low end warmth to the sound, much more than I would expect from this distance. I don't feel any pressure to move in for more low end. But when you do move in closer, the low end gradually increases in a really quite natural and balanced way. Moving back 6 inches now then, this is a league apart from a lot of the cheaper mics where the optimal distance or that window of balance is typically very small. And you have to be careful with those mics not to move either too close or too far off the mic, so it becomes too boomy or too thin very quickly. So with the OD505 you can rock back and forward and the tone remains remarkably consistent, and as a consequence I think you feel more relaxed, less distracted by your technique, and I think that possibly opens the door to just being more creative with your performance because the margins for error are just so forgiving. Now, if you work in a broadcast situation and you're used to using something like the BCM705 or even the SM7B, you'll be accustomed to using the mic very close, maybe 1 or 2 inches off it. But from this distance on my voice, it feels like way too much low end. But surprise, surprise, there is some support for you by the way of a low cut switch at 120Hz and 12 dB per octave. So let's enable that now. So now from 1 or 2 inches, it feels much more balanced right away, but there's still a nice bit of low end there and your voice isn't thinned out too excessively. So I think the implementation of the low cut is really very good and flexible, particularly if you're used to, eating the mic. Another innovation with the OD505 is what they're calling a 3D pop noise diffuser that covers the capsule. I'd rather call it an umbrella. And this is designed to reduce plosives reaching the diaphragm. And although I was sceptical about this initially, who'd have thought that, I think it does help a little bit. So if I was to talk directly into the mic and say Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, the plosives are fairly subdued, but they're still there, so I think it's still worthwhile learning proper mic technique and or using a pop filter. I think innovation is great if it helps a little bit, but it shouldn't replace a bit of audio education and perish the thought actually developing some skills. And I wasn't going to do off-axis rejection tests because I think all dynamics are really quite good at this, whether they be supercardioid or otherwise. The key take-home message for everyone is they don't pick up much sound from the sides. But for the diehard fundamentalists, this is us from the front of the mic. This is us from 90 degrees. Here we are at 180 degrees. And now we're back at the front of the mic. And having just listened back to those samples, I think it was fair to say there was minimal coloration there, so perhaps it was actually worth doing after all. Okay, so after that, let's do some comparisons then with a range of mics of different values, and hopefully that will be interesting to see what you actually get for your money. And the recording chain today will be direct into the Zoom F3 as interface and recorded into Adobe Audition. The levels will be normalised and we'll jump back and forward each mic a couple of times. So first up is the Behringer XM8500, which is going for about £20 at the moment. And for these samples we're going to read an extract from The Good Soldier's Wake by Jaroslav Hasek. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. So next up we have the Prodipe TT1, which goes for around £35 at the moment. And for a lot of these samples you might see me move the comparison mic a little bit closer to me. I'm doing that because I think that gets the most balanced sound out of them, and I want this to be a fairly real world use case comparison. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there, it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. So now we have the SE Electronics V7, which is about £75 here in the UK, and I've included this one because I think it's quite neutral in character, but it also has a fair bit of extension in the high end, so it should be a good comparison here. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. And next up we have the Beyerdynamic M59, hypercardioid. This is the Kurt Cobain Nirvana Unplugged in New York mic. Well, not the mic, there are many like it, and this one is mine. And I've included this one because it's a very similar frequency response and a V-shaped sound. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there, it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. So next up we have the Neumann BCM705, probably one of the heritage broadcast dynamics on the market today. You need to be quite close to this one to get the warmth out of it, but it is very silky and smooth. So this should be a good comparison for the OD505. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. Alright, so now we've moved over onto the SE Electronics Dynacaster in active mode, and I've set this one up with the most equivalent EQ settings, which for me is bass boost enabled and presence boost 2. I'll hold my hands up and say I really dislike this mode on the mic, but I think it's the most equivalent frequency response for comparison here. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why these loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. Okay, so now we have the Beyerdynamic M201TG, possibly my favourite mic for my voice, so we'll see how this one compares. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. And finally we're going to move over to the SM7B. This one, on paper at least, should be much darker in character. When Zvek subsequently described life in the lunatic asylum, he did so in exceptionally eulogistic terms. I really don't know why those loonies get so angry when they're kept there. You can crawl naked on the floor, howl like a jackal, rage and bite. If anyone did this anywhere on the promenade, people would be astonished. But there, it's the most common or garden thing to do. There's a freedom there which not even socialists have ever dreamed of. So moving on to some final thoughts then. This one has kind of turned the tables on me a little bit. I think when you usually think about dynamics, where the frequency response has a large presence boost, you automatically assume it'll be quite harsh, brittle and sibilant, just by the nature of those capsules. And those signature spoken word dynamics like the SM7B, the RE20, BCM705, even the M201TG, although it is by definition an instrument mic, they're all fairly conservative in the high end, and traditional thinking tells us that helps create this silky, darker sound that we all love. But the OD505 does that in a kind of brighter profile, with the same sort of rounded smoothness, and I've never really heard that before. It's a very warm mic, and even when I tried to bring some of the other mics a bit closer, it still seemed richer with more low end from further away. I think you can achieve a similar sound with some of the cheaper mics. I think the TT1 and maybe the V7 can do it, but that's a much more surgical approach where that optimal distance is much closer, much smaller, and the margin for error much greater. With the OD505 you have quite a bit more freedom to move about a bit, and the sound remains consistently warm, and a lot of people will absolutely love that. I think for those newer to recording will find those differences really quite subtle and perhaps not worth the extra money, assuming their $100 broadcast dynamic offers a similar sound profile, providing that you eat it. I think at the end of the day, most of those guys are just happy to hear their voices on the internet. And I think you need to go through a kind of rite of passage with microphones, and it takes a while for your hearing to appreciate that some of these nuances are really quite profound. And when you consider that we're putting this in the same league as those heritage mics, suddenly that £250 seems like an absolute bargain. Okay, that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time.